morning, everybody. Hey, Bruce. How is it going? Can you hear everything okay? I was kind of in a hurry this morning. For some reason, I woke up late and had a hard time getting myself rolling appropriately. So hopefully everything is audible. I'm also trying to warm up a little bit. So, how are you guys doing? Thanks, Bruce. I kind of thought, Saturday mornings are supposed to be kind of a loose conversation. But I figured, hey, it'd be kind of cool to talk about some triad stuff. Saturday mornings is kind of turning into also I kind of workshop some lesson ideas. So, if you guys have questions, please feel free to put them out there. But then I'm going to talk about some of the triad ideas that I like to use when I'm playing and when I'm writing music. This will kind of like also head in towards where we were talking in the last live one, I think on Wednesday, about turning songs that are typically piano tunes or not typically guitar tunes into arrangements that work on guitar. And the stuff I'm going to talk about today is kind of some of the basic understanding that I think helps being able to do that, So, my pedal board adventure is still in pieces. I kind of hit this point where I got really frustrated, and the main options to do anything other than what I had are to buy an actual new pedal board, like a flat board with risers for the stripe and stuff. Or kind of figure out some other way of doing things, or saying screw it and like buying a Helix and just enduring that. But I don't know. So it's that project has kind of been backburnered for a little bit while I think through it. Who all is here besides Bruce? I see that there are 3 people here. Alright, so let me do this. Let's talk about triads for a moment. One of the things that I really like doing is the idea that all of these sounds, whenever we talk about harmony, it's about talking about ways to describe or organize sounds. And because we deal with what's essentially Western harmony, Western European harmony for most of what we do here, actually. What is this thing here? Let's get rid of that. All right. So say we have a C chord. Yes, Howard. Existence is illusory and eternal. So say we've got a C major chord here. This is the easiest way to do this. And I'm just going to stack it like this. So I got C. Oops. No, I'm not going to do that. It would help if I had the right. So the notes are C, E, and G. All right, and in this stack, these notes happen to be the root, major third, and perfect fifth. Now, usually we just say 3 and 5, but in the case of this, it becomes a little bit more important because all of these things are going to change relative to whatever notes we put around this. So one of the easiest things to do is just to take any of those notes, all right, and besides the root, play or invert the chord, play the third in the bass. So I've got, here's the root position C, and let's give you guys the guitar view too. All right, so here's C major, right? I've got this triad right here. This actually happens to be a second inversion. The notes here are 5, root, and then 3, but for the purposes of what we're doing, this will be workable. All right, so here's the root position with the 3rd in the bass. That's a sound. All right, here's with the E in the bass. All right, so then this is C over E, which is also the first inversion. All right, so we've got E, G, and C. That's essentially what's going on there. That's one sound. And then the 5th in the bass, C over G. All right, so G, C, and E. All right, and honestly, when you stack notes in an inversion, they can be in any order for our purposes, not like if you're taking music school classes. All right, but what this does is it gives us the opportunity to think about this a little bit more shorthanded way, right? And with chord inversions, you can do cool things. You know, say you've got a chord progression that goes G, D, and then E minor, right, which is pretty common. The easiest thing to do is to take the D and make it an inversion, which means that you're basically putting the F sharp in the bass, and that gives you that smooth root movement down. You know, like, you know, ba ba, Miss American Pie, whatever. All right, that's one of the more common usages of chord inversions like this, but it also shows you that what we're gonna spend a lot of time doing today is talking about how putting other notes underneath your triad are going to change the function of the notes in the triad. All right, and that's kind of the first thing. One of those things. Tears in Heaven. Watch me get a copyright strike just for playing that. But there's one part where he's playing this. It's an A with an E in the bass. So the song is in A, and he plays A and the E with the A with the E in the bass, and then E, and it resolves there. So it gives you this extended resolution of the 5 chord. And we're going to talk about this idea quite a bit in a minute. But in that Eric Clapton song, he's actually doing something that's pretty common in Baroque and classical music, which is using that inverted 1 chord to basically give us an extension of the cadence and then the resolution. It extends the tension. You get a lot of that kind of thing. That's kind of a cool thing to do if you're writing music, right? So those are the inversions of the chord, just triad wise, right? And there's a million ways of utilizing that. When we talk about other notes that you can do with this, you guys still following me? And also, is this making sense? Anyone? Bueller? Okay. One of the things that I like doing, and we're going to talk about a disco song here in a minute, but taking this C triad, C, E, and G, all right, and putting an A underneath it. Now, a lot of this, remember that most of our harmony in the music that we play, popular music, Western popular music, is based off of thirds. It's triad. Words escaping me, but basically, you know, it's harmony based off of thirds. And so what we do is, you know, C to E is a third, E to G is a third. Well, A to C is a third, right? And by putting this A note, I'll play the open A string underneath that C triad. We now get A minor 7, because this is now the root, minor 3rd, 5th, and then minor 7. All right. All right. That little movement right there, which you hear in every Dorian backing track, as well as every Santana song. All right. That's basically, you're taking a C triad and going to a D triad, right? But leaving the root underneath it. the A root, right? So you got A minor 7 to second inversion D, right? In this context, it doesn't work the same as when you do the inverted 5 chord in the Tears in Heaven kind of root, right? But what it does do is it gives us this very Dorian kind of sound, because you've got in the D triad, if you think about it relative to the A, so if we keep that A in the bass, then we've got, actually, I'll just put the D, F sharp, and A. All right, what you end up having here is it's the root, the 4, or 11th, depending on how you're thinking about this. The F sharp is the major 6th, which is very Dorian, and then the A is still the root, right? So you get this kind of like movement here that's a lot of color and not a lot of tension, even though it's got the 11th. Because the thing about the 4th is that if you're playing a major chord, right, that 4th or the 11th is a half step away from the 3rd. So the tension it creates is that it wants to resolve, right? But when you've got a minor chord, you don't feel that need to resolve down, because it's a whole step away from a chord tone, not a half step, right? Anytime you have a note that's a half step away from a chord tone, it typically feels this need to move in. And that's one reason why, like, if you play a wrong note, say I'm playing A7 here, and I accidentally hit E flat, that feels good. Or, you know, you can get away with playing any note if you realize that the movement to resolution is towards a chord tone when you're a half step away from that chord tone. Okay, so I'm going to stop just for a second. You guys have any questions? All 4 of you? This is one of my favorite ways to kind of think about harmony, because suddenly, once you get used to the system of moving the root note around, you get this really cool way of making color happen in your guitar parts. Okay? One of the songs from the Felt album, the band Felt I was in, and I've probably demonstrated this before, but the chorus, and you have to excuse my singing this morning, it goes D to E, 2, 3, 4. That's the whole chorus. It's in the key of A, right? So this basically ends up resolving back to the top. But you got this, I woke up when you fell down, signs of life far underground. Is this where it all begins to fall apart? And then back into the chorus. At the end of the song, though, you know, typically when I write rock tunes, I like the chorus to go multiple times at the end, because that's where it should feel good. But that's boring to do it like this. So I kind of figured, hey, let's treat the band like a piano, and these triads are going to be in the right hand, all right? And then the left hand on the piano, where you play your bass notes, we're going to actually do some of this moving of the bass note around and see what happens, right? So I woke up when you fell down. There's the D and here's the E. Signs of life far underground. Is this where it all begins? Now here's where it would normally fall apart. Oh, roots lead right back. Instead of going to regular D, I go to first inversion D. So I got the 3rd, 1,000, and then first inversion E. And then we've got second inversion D, second inversion E, root position, because you got the root in the bass, D, root position E, root position D, second inversion E, second inversion D, first inversion E, first inversion D, root position E, and then the big resolution, just all root position chords. All right. So in context, let me get some coffee here. All right, I've got, and keep, you'll have to see, like, these are the D chord, the triads, but it's still all D and E. Now I woke up when you fell down, signs of life far underground. Is this where it all begins? where all roads out lead right back in. 1,000 words for me to say, and all I could think to say is, how could she leave her pieces for me to pick up when I can't hold my own? I can't hold my own. All right. You hear basically this just goes back and forth, D to E, but it's what goes on underneath that actually gives the song a little bit different structure. All right. You guys have any questions so far? Also, I don't have to, like, if you guys have like really burning questions about other topics, let me know and I can cover that. All right, so those are a couple things with the triads. Now, here's the thing: is that anything we put underneath a triad will change its function, right? So we got root. Whoops, actually, root, third, fifth, right? Let's just take every note, every chromatic note, and put it underneath this E triad and see what we get. All right, so if we've got which E inversion? You talking about this one? Yeah, the E with the G sharp. It's good for you. Chord inversions will make you a man. No. All right, so I got the C chord, right? Now, if I make this C sharp, these notes relative to the C sharp become the flat 5, major 7, minor 3rd. It's kind of a weird chord. I mean, if we had a name for that, that would be C sharp with a bunch of gobbledygook after it, right? Because it's basically it's a diminished chord with a major 7. Yeah, right. If we put the D underneath it, right, this is actually a pretty cool chord. We've got D, G, C, and E, right? So this becomes relative to the D. We've got the 4, sus4 or 11, whichever one you want to call it. You've got the minor 7, and you got the 9. Right, that chord works really cool. Say we're doing a brand new car. Basically, it's like a suspended chord, and it works as a 5 chord a lot of the time. We'll kind of show that in a second, but you know, that movement's really cool because you got the suspension there. You got the 4th into a regular D7 and then into G. So that would be like the 5 chord in the key of G. One way to look at that, all right? So then if we put the minor 3rd there, the E flat underneath a major triad, all right, we've got E flat. So then this is the major 3rd, the 6th, and then the flat 9. Cool sound, right? Not eminently usable. We put the 3rd underneath it, and we got the inversion. We put an F underneath it. We get F major 7, right? Because F, and then actually F major 9 really. You've got G, which becomes the 9th. You've got C, which is the 5th, and you got the major 7 here in the E, right? So the important notes that make it a major 7 are the 3rd, which we actually don't have here, but we've got a suspension, and then we've got the major 7. All right. So what happens is that's kind of a more modern major 7 chord. So like, right, there's a major 7 that you would find in a book. This is actually one of those things that you'd play like in any like jazzy thing like after 1968 or so. All right. Now with the F sharp in the bass, let's bring this here, because you can do the F here. Oh, believe it or not, actually this is a, so here's your C chord and here's the F. Actually, I do like this chord voicing. That's kind of cool chord voicing with the lower one there. The F sharp, right, this is where we get into kind of weird sounds, right? So if we try and justify this versus the F sharp, you've got the flat 9, flat 5, and major 7. What do we call that? Because in reality, I don't know if we'd have a good name for that without cracking a theory book. All right, the flat 9 and it's very altered sounding. I like the sound though. And then we've got your inversion with the fifth in the bass, right? So that gives us a C major chord, but we can also look at it, and this is where it becomes useful for guitar, as the fact that your C chord with the G in the bass, if you think about G as the root, you got root, fourth, or really fourth in this case, and then sixth. Right, and that's where we end up getting either the Tears in Heaven resolution thing, because it kind of becomes a suspension in a way, right? Or we get that sort of thing like from All Blues that I was playing at the beginning of the video. If you're new and you're coming in, say hi. Let me know who's here. That kind of helps me tailor what I'm talking about, if you guys are here. All right, so there's that guy. Now, if we put the G sharp there, this is actually not an unusable chord, believe it or not. It's a G sharp or A flat major 7 chord with a sharp 5. Right, so this is the major 7, the 3, and then the sharp 5. All right, and sometimes you use that in jazz. You know, you get a lot of these. There's the flat 5. And there's the major 7 augmented almost. And then if we put the A here, we end up getting the A minor 7 that we talked about before. If we put the B flat, right, this actually gives us a C7 chord, believe it or not, because this is the minor 7 and then the rest of the C triad. And if we put a B underneath it, that's actually a third inversion C major 7 chord. Right, which is, you know, basically it's just a major 7 chord. Hi, Robert. Good morning. And then you're back to the root, right? So any note underneath a triad will change its function. And sometimes those functions are very usable and very common. And sometimes you just get stuff like that, right? Which is the sharp 4 underneath the major triad. And that's a cool sound, but it doesn't really fit in most of our functional harmony. But if you're experimenting, it's a cool thing. And sometimes, you know, say I've got, let me switch this to E for a second. So I've got that drone string going, all right? All right, you get that kind of vamp sometimes in jazzier tunes. That's Frankie Valli, can't take my eyes off of you. Right. But actually, I'm just talking about moving the triad down here. Not exactly that song. All right. So you've got the E major, and you got the F sharp major, which is the 2 chord against the E. All right. And in E major against the E, right? You've got the 6, the 9, and the flat 5. All right. Likes to move. Right, and then you got the half step down. Now we justified all of these notes before against the C, but in this case, literally we're just taking these notes and we're moving them down until they resolve, right? So there's the way of looking at this where everything needs to be justified and thought about, analytically, and sometimes it's just cool to move a sound around, right? You know, and you don't really have to spend that much time analyzing these things. This sound actually, it was the minor triad. I think about that as E Phrygian, but it's not. Right? And there's no diatonic key, major or minor, that actually has major triads a half step apart. It just doesn't occur in diatonic harmony. So that's just a cool sound. All right. Those thoughts. Let me stop for a second. Let me ask you guys if you have any questions or issues. I'm just kind of blabbering theory at you today, and it's fun for me, but I don't know how you guys are enjoying this. We're going to talk about a common piano lick here in a second. So what do you guys think about the pedal board? Should I just chuck it all and get a Kemper or something? Or just not be as happy, but have life be easier? Or do I stick to the course and I just take Pedal Star Galactica to the next level, which would require another small investment of money, which it is Christmas and I'm supposed to be spending money on kids, not myself. That's the extra question for you guys. Right. We're doing all this stuff about how the triad works, in context of other notes. A couple other things we're going to talk about is in terms of making parts, but also using triads like triad pairs to imply other harmonies. So that's kind of what's going to be coming up here in a few minutes. All right. No questions. So what I'm going to do is let's just talk about one of the most common movements that you're going to find, like for bluesy, funky, jazzy rhythm guitar, if you've got one chord that needs to stay in one place, right? So in all blues, it's a piano riff. It's in G. Oops. Actually, I can do this better if I make it. All right. So what's happening is you've got the G triad against the G, the C triad against the G. So that's a second inversion C chord, which gives you the Tears in Heaven suspension. I can't believe I'm calling it that, right? And then I believe on the piano part on all blues, it's actually a D minor here with the G in the bass, right? And relative to the G, this D minor gives you the minor 7, the 9, and the 5, right? So that D minor over G gives us a lot of chord tones, but no third and no 7th, right? So it's actually just kind of a nice place to hang out, right? And then that C gives us the need or the impetus to resolve down to the G, right? All right, so that's that sort of thing. And you hear that, like, even like the Monkees. Oh my God, I can't remember anything. There we go. That's well, I'm a believer. You end up getting these. They're basically keyboard parts or piano parts that people transfer to guitars. We'll take the all blues thing and we'll just kind of go backwards with it, right? And what's happening, you're starting at tension and falling down the hill to resolve into that. Let me get rid of it. All right. You also find where instead of playing a D, right, you lose one note and you play basically an F triad, right? Because F and D are very close to each other. But when you do the F triad, instead of getting the 5th from the G, the D note, you get a C, which really, these two notes really make us want to move down to the C and then ultimately down to the G, right? All right, you hear that on keyboard parts all the time. All right, so G, here's a C triad, F triad. I think a lot of like 70s and 80s like Journey kind of pop, that kind of pop, because that music a lot of times was written by a keyboard player. All right, you get a lot of those kinds of chords in it, like Steely Dan and things like that. All right, so that guy there, I'll go. Okay, so there's what's his face? Joe Walsh. Right. So Funk 49, if you're familiar with that song, is basically based off of this idea where he's going, this is an A7 chord, right? So he's taking the C triad and hammering on to the C sharp right there, right? And what that does is that gives us the minor 7th, 3rd, and 5th of an A7 chord. And then he's got the D, so he's playing the 4 chord against the A. And then that bit right there, it's the D, G, D, and then back to the A. If we were to do this back in G where we're playing all blues thing, right? You've got G7, C, G7, right? And then that's the C chord from the inversion. You've got the F chord back to the C and then back down, right? So I don't know if that helps to see it that way. All right, but that's, you know, even in a guitar riff that you wouldn't think of as a piano riff, that's kind of where that... That's kind of where that comes from. Other thoughts? We can take, for instance, like if I'm playing A major 7, I can actually just play an E triad there, right? And that E triad gives us the 9, the 5th, and the major 7. Actually, that's the same thing as we were doing with the really wide thing. I don't know, for some reason I think about that differently, though, like as a jazz chord voicing. Okay, food for thought. Let's take a look through the years. Let's go back to the 70s for a minute. We have a couple of 70s tunes. Crazy Train. Okay, now this is an example of rock guitar. We're going to take the verse here. And he's pedaling this A. Alright, and then what happens, you've got these triads moving against the A. This is like 80s rock guitar 101 here. Playing this is Randy Rhoads on the Aussie tune, Crazy Train. He's playing a root position A triad, a first inversion E triad, first inversion D triad, and back to the A. Crazy. That's how it goes. Alright. Within that, the A is obviously the 1 chord in this key. The D is the 5, or the E is the 5 chord, the D is the 4 chord, right? So he's basically just playing chords against the tonic, against the bass note there. Alright, so that's the first example. You know, I'll do, let's see. Man, I don't remember anyway. Journey. Don't Stop Believing. Let's see. So you got Street, Street. Oh my God, I can't remember the tune. Street. Okay, this is what happens when you don't play a gig for the better part of a year. You don't remember the tune. Okay, so Street Light. Oh my God, this is killing me. I don't remember the song. Street light. Oh, there we go. People living just to find emotion. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Right, so you're pedaling on the A chord right there, and you're going B major to A major, B major to E major over that A right there, right? So if you look at that A with the B in the bass, that's really B7 with an inversion, right? Because then A is the 7th, and then this is the root 3 and 5. If you look at it versus the A, because here's the thing, is everything is relative to everything else, right? Against the A, then this becomes the 9th, the flat 5, and the 6th. Probably not the best. I like just looking at like a B7, because then it wants to resolve there, back to the A. Street light, people, right, and that's an E triad right there, right, and that's actually the big spreader major 7 chord, believe it or not. But when you're doing it with the distortion, hopefully this isn't too loud. It's wrong. Right, because those chords aren't just going like all together, you know, because they're separated like that, and they're more like chord stabs. You don't get all of the interactions, so kind of a weird way to look at. But then with the E in the bass, you've got B resolving to the E, right? So you know, you can look at this B triad. It'd be the 5, the major 7, and the 9. All right, but you've got that major 7 right there. It wants to resolve up a half step. What's that TV show? It sounds like some 70s or 80s TV, you know, like Silver Spoons or something like that. All right. Okay, so that's, you know, in that context, right? So you got, you know, triads against a journey tune. You've got Jesse's Girl. You guys know Jesse's Girl, I'm sure. Right, but in the bridge, so I'm playing the G here with my thumb. G major, D major, and the Greatest American Hero, probably. Right, and then A, right? So you've got these chords going by where it's just a G chord, G over D, right? And then A. Right. A with the G in the bass is actually what we also call the Price is Right chord. You want a brand new car, a year's supply of turtle wax, 47 boxes of rice-a-roni. Right, that's that chord, you know. I'm talking about 70s TV show, or even 60s TV show writing. Right, and basically there's a triad, there's G triad, but with the second note in the bass. Right. The other thing is, if we move one note, right, this goes from that kind of idea to being basically A suspended to A9, right? Because what happens here is root, 7, 9, and 4 or 11, and then when we resolve it down a half step, right? At that point, then it becomes that's the third, so it just becomes an A9 chord because you got the third, the 7, and the 9 in there against the A. Resolve to the D if you want to. Okay, I'm gonna take a little break, and if you guys have any questions. A lot of this is me just throwing a bunch of stuff out there. If you guys want to like watch this on repeat and write stuff down, that might be the best option for this, or ask questions later. I kind of like I'm kind of designing lessons on 2 or 3 levels, and some of them are just doing some really basic like beginner guitar lessons, because this is the time of year where people get new guitars for Christmas, and also I'm trying to raise my viewership, but then also I need to have stuff that's interesting to people who already play, and there's 2 tracks to that. One of them is where I think most of you guys are at, where you're trying to get your fundamental skills a little bit tighter. You already play, but you really want to re-examine the stuff that you feel like you didn't get right the first time, or were just never introduced to. And then there's the stuff like you know, let's talk about a guitar solo from you know, the clickbait kind of lessons. You know, it's a all right. So let's go disco. All right, so I Will Survive is on the audition list for the conservatory that I teach in. And this is one of those songs that I've played a million times over the years because it's just like every wedding that you would play in Southern California in the 90s and early 2000s. This was important, maybe even today. But you got this chord progression where if you just go through the chords as written, they look like this: A minor, D minor, G major, C major 7, F major 7, B half diminished, and then E sus4. All right, there's your Tears in Heaven chord, believe it or not. And then E. All right, now you could, it's the ballad of, once I was afraid, I was terrified, I thought I could never, but I thought inside, right? But when you're getting to the disco part, where they're actually playing the funky rhythm guitar, these are terrible chords. Nobody really wants to hear that. It gets in the way of the bass part. And it's just very kludgy sounding. Right. So what you end up having is the guitar part. The guitar player does a couple things that we've been talking about here. First, he's going to tune, because that's the kind thing. You guys ever, most of you guys are old enough to remember Blockbuster Video, or going to a video store and renting a video. And it'd always be the sticker, "Be Kind, Rewind." They should put stickers like that on, in guitar stores on guitars, like "Be Kind, Retune." Or YouTube videos, actually more offensive in YouTube videos. All right, so A minor, actually, let me refresh my memory real quick. Okay, A minor, D minor. There's the G. That's the actual guitar part. So you have an A minor triad up here. And because it's up here, right, it's out of the way of everybody else's parts. Right? So sonically, you're not kludging up the mid-range or the lower range. You're not going... All right, so you got A minor, root position. This guitar just does not want to be in tune. So A minor. There's D minor, which happens the second inversion D minor. And then he comes down here for the D. All right, and then what's this? Because in this point in the chord progression, it's a C major 7, but he's playing an E minor triad. And honestly, if you put the C, what you end up having is against the C, this becomes 3rd, 5th, and major 7. All right, as opposed to E minor. All right, so that's one of the first little triad tricks there. And then, actually, let me back up a second. Okay, so F major 7. So at this point, we're playing an A minor triad, but that A minor triad is over an F bass note, right? So actually, this is the major 7, 3rd, and then 5th, right? That is actually the top part of the F major 7 chord, all right? And then he plays a D minor triad. But at that point, the bass note is actually B. All right, and then when you play the bass note against that triad, now you've got the B half diminished chord. All right, and then he does this. This is E7 sus4. But what's going on? It's the 5th, the root, and here's the 4, and then it resolves just to a triad. So there's our Eric Clapton movement, Tears in Heaven movement. All right. So what happens is that he's able to hit all of the harmony, but he's keeping in mind that you don't need to play every note in the chord because the bass player is playing the root, and probably several other musicians are playing the roots. And, there are probably other notes in the harmony going on out there in the world. So the important stuff is you try and hit things that are interesting and also fit in context. So in this context, right? Those little triad bits work great. You know, here's the A, D, G, E minor for the C, and then there's the F major 7 because we've got the A minor triad on top of it. And then there's the B half diminished. That's the most striking one. All right, and then E suspended 7, and then major triad. All right, that, you know, I think that's one of the things about playing like the funkier rhythm guitar stuff is that, you know, your parts have to sonically stay out of the way of both the rhythm and the harmony of everything else going on. You know, when people who don't really listen to a style of music or don't really study it and then have to play it like you get a bar band and suddenly they got to throw in their couple dance tunes because they're playing Uncle Joe's wedding or Little Johnny's bar mitzvah, and they're used to playing, Black Sabbath tunes all the time. You know, those songs end up sounding kind of weird because the guitar is always in the wrong place sonically and rhythmically. All right, this one. All right, that rhythm, one, and, right, it's very syncopated. Doesn't start on the downbeat of 1 though, right? So that gives clearance for the bass note to pop through. You know, when we talk about that grid of time that we're talking about in previous live streams, where you're dealing with whatever happens on the downbeat of 1, all should be in time together. There's an additional consideration, and that's of amplitude or volume, because if you have 2 notes of the same pitch happening at the same time, the louder one is going to mask the less loud one. All right, and that's part of what happens, like when you dial in your guitar tone and it sounds awesome in your living room, and then you take it to a gig and it sounds like crap. But because your sound interacts with all of the other instruments and all the other sounds in the room. Well, that happens with harmony too, when you're trying to voice stuff on your instrument. So you have to be aware of that. So, you know, everybody staking out their own sonic territory becomes very important when you're working out accompaniment parts. All right, and if there's 2 guitar players, you know, having somebody play like that rhythm up here, all right, and then somebody playing something that's kind of a complementary rhythm in a different part of the guitar. Yeah, that kind of like bubble part that's kind of popular. Right, that sort of thing works because you're still hitting notes that are in the harmony, but you're playing something different rhythmically. That's weird. I'm getting a connection request from my laptop. Let's cancel that. Sorry, guys. And then those parts kind of integrate together, right? When everyone's playing the same rhythm, all right, you end up not hearing the harmony or the differences, the same parts, I should say, very well. So it doesn't sound good. Also, it's really hard for most people to play exactly in time with another guitar player live when you're playing a different part. So like it always sounds real sloppy. So having different parts means that like you're weaving these things together, like in a James Brown recording or a Bob Marley recording. Everyone's got their own territory, and you can hear them better than if they were playing kind of the same stuff. And then you're also staying out of the way of other instruments, bass and keyboards and whatnot. All right. Terry's comment is probably one of the best things to think about, which is that the 3rd and the 7th of any chord is really what defines its quality, whether it's a major chord, minor, dominant, diminished, any of those things. Well, not the diminished and augmented, but the 3rds and 7ths give you the important parts of the chord. The 9th is a nice color note. You know, it's kind of a cool thing, right? And it's the first extension, so it's not too weird sounding. It's not like you're throwing the sharp 11 on top of something. Okay. I'm going to pause a second for questions. My coffee is cold. It's gross. So let's briefly talk about superimposing triads over a single chord backing deck. So I'm going to take one of my single chord backing tracks, and we're gonna basically pull out some modes against it that don't exist within the sound. Let me just make sure we are connected. Wait a second, I should have find my own channel. View channel. Sorry guys. I'm usually, well, I like to say I'm usually more on it than this, but you guys know me by now. Okay, so I'm gonna take the major chord, Triad, and we'll do the C major one. All right, can you guys hear this? Actually, before I get to the soloing part, all right, the thing that makes this actually sound interesting and not just one chord is I'm playing the in C, I'm playing the 4 chord, I'm playing the F triad. All right, so if we're going, I'm playing that chord there, and that's actually what gives me a little bit of movement without changing the harmony. All right, so if I just play the C triad, that's pretty boring, right? But if I do this in pairs, and for instance, my favorite pair for this right now is going to be where I play a C and then a B flat, right? Because what that B flat does, right, is it gives me the minor 7, the 9, and the 4, the 11th. Right? So that's a great way to infer that it's a dominant chord sound, or that it's a harmony that is not just major, but you can play that. And that's what's the Reeling in the Years, that Steely Dan tune, right? They do a lick. I don't remember how it goes, but you know, over this A, he's basically playing the G triad and then the A triad, right? And that's kind of a cool way of extending an idea, staying in the key. If you're thinking 7. So that's a triad pair for a dominant chord sound. Now, a triad pair for a Lydian sound would be the 1 chord and then a major 2 chord. Right. Can you guys hear that? So when you're playing Reeling in the Beers, the C major, you got the 1 chord, so we're really like, that's where our tonic is. But then when you play the D major, what you're getting is you're getting the sharp 4, which is the Lydian mode sound. You're getting the 6 and the 9. So you got 2 notes that are still in the C, you know, universe, and you got 1 note that says, hey, this is actually kind of a different sound or different mode, right? So whereas when you're doing the 1 chord and then the whole step below, right, you're getting 1 note out of that B flat that doesn't exist in C major, right? So that B flat says, hey, this is a dominant chord. Remember I was saying that the 3rds and 7ths identify the tonality, the basic tonality, right? Well, that's what's going on there, right? So then when we do the major triad and then we do the whole step up, we're getting 2 scale tones. We're getting 1 note that says, hey, something's different here. And that different thing is the sharp 4. And honestly, I could probably play all 3 of these and we get what's called Lydian dominant sound, right? No, not exactly. Okay, so, where was I? C. That's another one of those kind of like 70s piano vamp sounds. All right, and that's that Lydian thing. Right, that's the D major triad. We which is the whole step up from the 1, resolving to the 1 chord. I could probably... those are kind of my favorite triad pairs. And you can use them a bunch of different ways, but, you know, just taking, you know, over one of these single chord backing tracks, and wonder if there's a way to... Yeah, there is a way. I'll put a link to the those backing tracks in here. I'll open while I'm doing this. If you guys have any questions, problems, would like to speak to the manager. Okay, actually not a silly question. This is a good question, because Lydian is one of those things that, give me just a second before I engaging my brain while trying to navigate my YouTube channel. Okay. It's kind of funny, like, if I pay attention to the traffic thing, these have become very popular all of a sudden. And what's cool is that these are like 20-25 minute long backing tracks where it's just the 1 chord vamp that you're hearing me play over. So you can work out ideas like this. Lydian, here's the thing about Lydian. All right, it's a major sound. It's got a major 3rd and a major 7, but it's got a sharp 4. Now, we've talked about in the past that the major scale, the notes work a certain way to make resolution happen, right? So when we talk about like what defines a major key, it's usually the 5 chord resolving to the 1 chord, right? So in this case, if I'm in A, let's do this in C, right? So it'd be a G7 resolving to the C right there, right? The notes in the G7 chord that make that happen are the 3rd, which we also call the leading tone, because that's a B, which in the key of C. Remember, I was saying that half steps away from chord tones want to resolve, all right? And then the 7th of the G chord is this F right here. This is where this is going to become important here in a second, right? Because that note wants to resolve down to the 3rd. So what happens when we have a resolution of harmony is that these 2 notes kind of move up or down a half step, right? It's like one of the most important things they teach you in music school, harmony, at the very beginning, right? Now, anytime you've got a major key, right, that's kind of what happens. So like, if we're playing over any, like Brown Eyed Girl, right, those chords define a certain ecosystem of notes, right? A lot of people say, oh, well, it's also major, so you can play Lydian over. But the problem is, right, you're actually playing, you know, a C sharp against a C chord or a D, right? And that note just doesn't, you know, it doesn't make friends, right? What that Lydian scale is when you're playing in a major key and you've got some other major chord happening. All right, so you hear this a lot, like in like Latin music, like bossa nova. So if I'm going C and I'm going Girl from Ipanema. Let me do it in the key I remember it. So F major. There's the dominant 2 chord, minor 2. That's basically the 5 chord there, and then 1, right? So in that, right, over the major 7 chord, I would play major. But then, right, the bridge, it goes up a half step to G flat major. Right there, Lydian works really good because it doesn't feel the need to resolve. Because the problem is that the overall harmony of the song is F major, right? We eventually want to resolve there. So any other major chord, we really want to play Lydian, because then it stays away from this thing where the scale leads you to a resolution that the song is not going to go to. All right. So basically, if you're playing a blues tune, you're not playing Lydian, right? Because all of that harmony functions a certain way. If you're playing a pop tune, unless the chord progression was like C and then C over D, you're not going to play Lydian, right? You know, this turns into one of those things where it's a mode, and it generally needs to have a chord that sits there for a long enough time that you're not basically it's not functioning as a part of some overall harmony. We're not in the key of F like in Girl from Ipanema. Like when I go up to G sharp, right? It works really good there because it exists in its own place, and we're not resolving to basically we're not changing keys. We're just changing that chord for a little while to get a little different sound. Does that help? Ultimately, don't play Lydian unless you're playing over jammy stuff. And also, like, if you're over like a one chord that doesn't have any other chords around it that define the harmony. Like my backing tracks, these backing tracks have other notes in them, right? Because I was just saying, the C, basically it's C and then F over C, right? So this doesn't sound very good. Whereas it's a major scale that's not wanting to resolve since there's no 5 chord. That's the best. Well, don't think about the 5th degree. It's basically because you don't have, it doesn't, it's not going to have a 5 chord of its own that's going to resolve to it. All right, but the 5th scale degree is still in that chord, in there somewhere. It's not about the scale degree. It's about what chord is in the harmony, I guess. Does that make sense? All right. If I'm playing C, right, and I've got all the other chords in C major, right, I can play C major there. But when it goes to E flat, if I play C major there, it doesn't sound quite as cool. It just sounds out of place. Whereas if I avoid that note that needs to resolve by playing the sharp 4, then it's pretty cool. Yeah, I guess that's the way to look at it, Terry. Is no. That's probably the best way to do that. Okay, other questions? I thrive on questions. Man, this is what happens when I don't warm up. I think I need to raise my bridge pickup in this guitar. Hey Terry, here's a pickup question for you, since you know about these. Are the clean cut, is it actually going to be louder, all things being equal, than the hyper vintage, even though one's a humbucker and the other is essentially a single coil? Or is that just my imagination? Or is that just my perception? It just feels like, and I don't have very much experience with mixing like P90 style pickups with humbuckers, so I don't know if that's really the case or not. I love the clean cut, the P90 rail hammer in this. All right, so it's probably a pickup height thing. Or just a perception thing. Still sounds good, but I really love the clean cut the most, I think. So, all right, guys. You guys have any other questions? This is actually officially Terry's private lesson time, so I probably should switch over to that. But if you guys have any questions, I can catch it before we go. Hopefully this was useful. I like thinking about stuff this way because it allows me to catalog sounds. All right, when I'm writing stuff or I'm coming up with parts. So, that's entirely possible. I should fiddle with the pickup height. Okay, so we have, in one of the lessons I posted to the forum, he talks about focusing on arpeggios instead of scales because you're really connecting chord tones. That's 100% the way that I think. I like being able to outline the harmony while I'm playing. You know, if I was playing there'll never be another you, right? So it's E flat major 7 and then 2 5 1 and C minor. Right, so I'll play the E flat. Right, and then that 2 5 1 into C minor. I love thinking about, because it's a minor key, you've got the half diminished and then the flat 9 on the 5 chord, right? So coming up with different ways to navigate those arpeggios, that's the first thing, is if you're just trying to like pick out notes in the harmony, that's one kind of sound. When there are quicker things like a 2/5, right, at that point I've got a lot of ways of navigating those sounds. And sometimes I can just play a harmonic minor scale over that and C. Sometimes I'll play the arpeggios with the flat 9 on the 5 chord. If I'm just playing like over that E flat though, right? I can make a melody out of that arpeggio, right? But a lot of times it goes back to what we're talking about with the other lesson stuff, where what's happening is that I've got the arpeggio notes and I got the notes that aren't the arpeggio, right? And those embellishment notes help me make a melody out of the arpeggio without dealing with the whole scale, right? Right, so right there I went third up to the 5th of the E flat, right? So essentially I'm playing that out of the arpeggio, right? And then here, right, here's the 5 to the 3, right? And I went 3, 5, flat 5, 4, 5, and then resolve. So I'm outlining the harmony using a lot of the chromatic stuff. That's the arpeggio a half step high. Alright, so if I was playing over, I'm going to take a risk here. So here's a backing track for this song. So just kind of pulling that out of my butt right there. You know, I can use chord tones. I can use the embellishments. I can use that scale, right? But make sure that I'm resolving my phrases on the arpeggio. That's one way to look at it. Hi, Steve. I'll also think about scale sometimes over chord, like if I'm playing over like it goes 2-5-1 in A flat, I can think about the Dorian mode over that, and that gets everything in that, right, and then resolve to the A flat major, right? So there's a lot of ways to think about it, but at the core of it, no matter what scale or chordal approach, I'm always really aware of the notes in the triad. And the problem with that was that when I first learned this approach, it was all about just like, I'm just playing notes in the triad and this sounds like garbage, right? So I would get like this sort of thing. Right? So basically you're just arpeggiating through the changes and there's no melody happening there. And I think that's kind of what he's getting at, is that you kind of have to start working on melodic development around the triads, right? So all the things that I talk about in terms of chord tone soloing, those are all things that I can do when I play a jazz tune that help me make it work. Now, just playing, like even if I was playing just that major, right, that doesn't sound very jazzy either, but the things that do make it sound jazzy are all those embellishments or chromatic passing tones. Right? So I think that's probably the best way to look at it, is you want to have a vocabulary that allows you to build melodies out of those triad notes, not just think about I'm playing the triad over these, right? So you kind of have all of these approaches to that, right? And then sometimes you're just playing stuff that makes sense melodically to you. Sometimes you just ignore the changes. So let me take another whack at this here. Forgot the ending. All right. Sometimes it's not. I would get into this thing where I would just think I have to have this steady stream of notes in the arpeggio, and sometimes just playing through it and hitting a few notes, and also not playing every chord. That's the hardest thing for me when I play jazz. I have to like stay in this, like every chord is important, and it really isn't, right? So if I play that song without that, there's the E flat, there's the D, there's the G, C minor, D flat, E flat, A. Now I love this, that note right there, because that chord's actually not in the key. There's the E flat and the C minor. Right, that note's important because that A is not in the key. A minor is. Right, and then that, right, that's a big 5 chord going to a 1 chord. And in jazz, you love to be able to hit things like with a altered dominant sound, right? Which, right, that's a scale for another time because that's got a lot of altered notes in it. All right, but the hardest thing is treating it like you're cooking, and you don't put every ingredient in at all the time, and that's always been my Achilles heel with jazz. Is you get option shock. You kind of freak out because like, oh my god, I got all these things to play. And then the best jazz musicians, you know, listen to Jim Hall. if I could say, if I gave you any advice about jazz guitar, it's just listen to a bunch of Jim Hall albums. Because he plays really sophisticated things, but he makes it sound really simple. And sometimes he's just playing really simple things and making them sound sophisticated, right? It's really, it's a great way to break up your preconceptions about this stuff. When we teach this stuff online, we have to have these things to talk about. We have to talk about arpeggios and scales and all this other stuff. But when you listen to Jim Hall, it just reminds you that it's really just about melody. All right, and how you're shaping that melody using different like colors and shades of tension and resolution. All right, you know, so you could go through a piece of music, like let's go back to the beginning of this chord progression. All right, I'll play notes. You know, I'll just go. Here's G. That's the third of the E flat. There's the fifth and the flat 9 of the next 2 chords. There's the fifth of the C. Right there's the fifth of the D flat, E flat. There's the A, D flat, E flat, C minor. There's that note in the A, F, major, F minor, F7, E flat, right? So instead of worrying about all this like vertical stuff for the harmony, I was able to basically find a through line, is what we call it, where you just have like a movement up and down a whole step or a half step. Right, I'll do this again without talking over because I was kind of screwing up because I was trying to like analyze it while I was talking. But here, watch what happens. I'll just say the chord names out loud. E flat major, D half diminished, G7 flat 9, C minor, B minor, G, I'm sorry. It changes the harmony there, right? But could you kind of hear my through line, where I took, you know, a chord tone and then just moved it up and down to fit the harmony a little bit. That's using the arpeggios and not scales, strategically, right? And you could hear the harmony happen, but it wasn't like I was like having to go, you know. You know, that then you're not making music, you're just trying to remember arpeggios. All right, so when you improvise, a lot of times it's good to kind of have a strategy to kind of figure out where your through line is through a jazz standard like that, and then use that to help shape your thing. Drop the root for the E flat, but use it for C minor. I don't know if I really think about it consciously. You know, that's kind of what I'm hearing at that moment. Thanks. It's that's one of those things. There's a million guys that play and teach jazz better than me. But for me to survive playing jazz, I have to be able to distill these concepts down into something that I can process in my little tiny mind. And that's kind of the lifeline, is being aware of the harmony, but really only trying to utilize a little bit at a time. It's like a computer. It's like using a Google Chromebook. Oh yeah, okay, so basically E flat, major, and C minor, right? This goes back to the beginning. You might not have been here for the very beginning, but I was talking about the fact that like these triads are just groups of notes that if you change the note underneath, you end up getting different harmonies, right? So those three notes are the root 3 and 5 of the E flat, but if you put the C underneath it, right, then you end up getting, that's the minor 7, minor 3rd, and the 5th of the C chord. Right, so they're virtually the same chord. And a lot of times, like if I get something in a jazz standard and it's basically like, G and then E minor, all right, to me that's all G major, right? Because functionally it works that way. Or like say, G and then, so 2 and 5 in G, and then, they replace the G chord the second time with the G. It doesn't really change how I think about it. I'm not going to really spend too much time thinking about the E minor, because at the core of it, you have to pick out what's important and jettison the rest. Because like if we go back to my whole computer processing thing, I don't have the processing power. I don't have the computing cores to handle all the stuff at once. And at the end of the day, you don't have to, because they're so similar that the overall context will make the point for you. Like the bass player will probably be playing the G the first time and then the E the second time, right, to make those chords work. But all the other notes are the same, so why sweat the small stuff? I should remind you that G is G, B, and D, and then E minor is E, G, and B. And if you add the D from the G chord, then you're also getting E minor 7. All right. All right. Even like, so if I play a G and I play, this is just a G major triad, major 7. Right, that's F sharp, G, B, and D. All right, if I play the E, that works pretty cool there too. If I go A, D, right, you can kind of see that little phrase, F sharp, G, B, and D, those notes, because all of those, everything there is in that G major ecosystem, right? Keeping that going and changing the bass note underneath doesn't change much, other than the fact that the notes are different relative to the lowest note that you're hearing. All right, so they function differently. It's like when I love doing like these like these static licks over she was an American girl, right? So there's a part where the solo at the end basically does those chords on American Girl, right? And you've got the like that repeating lick right there that Mike Campbell plays over those. But a lot of times you do that, and then I like changing it to, right? And basically that's just in D major, which the key is in. I've got the 5 in the root of the key, and I'm moving. That's the 3rd, the 2nd, 4th, 3rd. Right, so D, E. It's kind of hard to do all this. And then G. A. And then back to the D, and then it resolves, right? So I'm keeping it there, and then it works against all those things in different ways, but when everything finally comes back to the D, which is in the key, my lick actually releases the tension, right? So you got the static idea that stays in one place, and all the harmony moves around it, right? So whether it's the fact that I'm playing an E flat triad, regardless of if it's E flat major or C minor, or I'm playing a lick that's like just one batch of notes, and then the chords are changing underneath it. Really it's all about the relationships that these notes have to these chords or whatever is moving, and then how that affects the resolution of the idea ultimately, whether it's a Tom Petty song or a Miles Davis tune or whatever. Does that make sense? It's easier to deal with these things, um, in the context of a real tune. That's part of the difficulty with this. So, okay. So, let me do this. I really have to get off and give Terry his actual private lesson at this point. This is the bailout point where he doesn't actually get his lesson. So I'm going to leave it here. Terry, I'll see you on Zoom in just a minute. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. Don't put them in the chat box, the live chat box. Put them in the comments underneath, especially if you're watching this on replay. And then I'll usually, within a day or two, I'll try and answer any questions at that point. Okay, guys? Thanks a lot. Hopefully this was fun. It was very dry material, but I think it's pretty important stuff. So, and I will see you guys live on Wednesday, Christmas Eve. I'll do something. So, thanks, guys.